Welcome back to Footnotes and Folly, and to Josephus's Wars. I am Professor Reginald St. John Pemberton, and this is part 14, where we open Book 3. When we left off, the incompetent Cestius Gallus had been beaten and chased from before Jerusalem, and the whole of Judea was in open revolt. Now Nero, hearing of the disaster, sends his most seasoned soldier to crush it, Vespasian, a blunt, hard-bitten general fresh from Britain, with his son Titus at his side. Josephus pauses to describe the land they are about to invade: Galilee, Samaria, and Judea, and then gives us his famous, admiring piece on the Roman army itself, its discipline, its order, its camps, its march, a war machine so perfect it makes victory look like mere routine. Then the legions move, Placidus tries the strong town of Jotapata and is beaten back, and Vespasian himself marches into Galilee. Let us begin.
When Nero learned that the Romans had met with bad success in Judea, a hidden alarm and fear came over him, as often happens in such cases. In public, however, he put on a proud and angry manner, and said that what had happened was due more to the negligence of the commander than to any courage in the enemy. Since he thought it proper for the man who carried the weight of the whole empire to treat such misfortunes with contempt, he pretended to do so, and acted as if his spirit were above every sad accident of that kind. Still, the disturbance within him was plain from the anxiety he showed over how his affairs might be restored. As Nero considered whom he should entrust with the affairs of the East, now that the whole region was in such turmoil, and who would be best able both to punish the Jews for their rebellion and to keep the same disorder from spreading to the neighboring nations, he found no one equal to the task except Vespasian. Vespasian was able to bear the heavy burden of so great a war. He had already grown old in the camp, and from his youth had been trained in military actions. Long before this he had pacified the West and made it subject to the Romans when the Germans had thrown it into disorder. By his arms he had also recovered Britain for them, a country that had been little known before, and by doing so he obtained for his father Claudius the honor of a triumph without Claudius having taken any trouble or labor of his own. Nero judged these circumstances to be favorable signs. He saw that Vespasian's age gave him reliable experience and great skill, that Vespasian's sons stood as pledges of his loyalty to Nero, and that the strength of their youth would make them useful instruments under their father's prudence. Perhaps, too, Providence was already intervening and preparing the way for Vespasian himself to become emperor afterward. In the end, Nero sent Vespasian to take command of the armies in Syria. He did this with many praises and flattering titles, the kind that necessity required, and that might soften Vespasian into compliance. Vespasian then sent his son Titus from Achaia, where Titus had been with Nero, to Alexandria, so that he might bring back from there the 5th and the 10th legions. Vespasian himself crossed the Hellespont and came by land into Syria, where he gathered the Roman forces together, along with a considerable number of auxiliaries supplied by the kings in that region. After the Jews had defeated Cestius, they were so lifted up by their unexpected success that they could not control their zeal. Like people whose good fortune has blown them into flame, they carried the war out to more distant places. They soon gathered a large multitude of their boldest soldiers and marched away toward Ascalon. This was an ancient city, 520 furlongs from Jerusalem, and it had always been hostile to the Jews. For that reason they decided to make their first attack against it, and to come as close to it as possible. The expedition was led by 3 men who were chief among them all in strength and judgment: Niger called the Persite, Silas of Babylon, and John the Essene. Ascalon itself was strongly surrounded with walls, but it had almost no nearby support on which it could rely. Its garrison consisted of 1 cohort of foot soldiers and 1 troop of cavalry, commanded by Antonius. The Jews, driven by anger, marched faster than usual. As if they had traveled only a short distance, they came very near the city and pressed right up to it. But Antonius knew beforehand of the attack they intended to make on the city. He drew out his cavalry in advance, and, undismayed by either the number or the courage of the enemy, met their first assaults with great bravery. When they crowded close to the walls, he drove them back. The Jews were unskilled in war, while they had to fight men who were trained in it. They were infantry fighting cavalry. They were disordered while their enemies were united. They were poorly armed while the Romans were fully equipped. They fought more from rage than from sober judgment, and they were exposed to soldiers who obeyed exactly and did everything they were ordered at the slightest signal. For these reasons they were easily beaten. As soon as their first ranks were thrown into disorder, they were put to flight by the enemy cavalry. Those behind, pressing toward the wall, fell onto the weapons of their own side and became enemies to one another. This continued until all of them were forced to give way before the cavalry attacks, and were scattered across the whole plain. That plain was broad and entirely suited for horsemen, which was a great advantage to the Romans and caused the slaughter of the greatest number of the Jews. When some fled, the Romans could overtake them and force them to turn back. After driving them back from their flight and pushing them together, they ran them through and killed vast numbers. Others of the Romans surrounded other groups of them, drove them wherever they turned, and killed them easily with arrows. The Jews, though so numerous, seemed isolated and alone to themselves because of the distress they were in, while the Romans, though few, had such success that they seemed to themselves the larger multitude. The Jews struggled fiercely under their misfortune, ashamed of so sudden a flight and hoping their fortune might change. The Romans, encouraged by their success, felt no weariness. The fight lasted until evening, by which time 10,000 Jews lay dead, along with 2 of their generals, John and Silas. Most of those who survived were wounded. Niger, their remaining general, was wounded too and fled with the rest to a small city of Idumea called Salis. Only a few of the Romans were wounded in this battle. Even so, the spirits of the Jews were not broken by so great a disaster. Instead, the losses they had suffered sharpened their resolve for further attempts. They disregarded the dead bodies lying under their feet, and their earlier glory tempted them to risk a second destruction. After remaining quiet for so short a time that their wounds had not yet fully healed, they gathered all their forces and came again to Ascalon with greater fury and in much greater numbers. But their former bad fortune followed them, as a result of their lack of skill and their other deficiencies in war. Antonius placed ambushes for them in the passes through which they had to go. There they unexpectedly fell into traps, and before they could form themselves into a regular fighting body, they were surrounded by cavalry. More than 8,000 of them were killed. All the rest fled, and Niger fled with them, still performing many bold actions as he escaped. The enemy pressed hard on them, and drove them all together into a certain strong tower belonging to a village called Bezide. Antonius and his men did not want to spend much time on this tower, which was difficult to take, nor did they want the Jews' commander, the bravest man among them, to escape. So they set the wall on fire. As the tower burned, the Romans went away rejoicing, assuming that Niger had been destroyed. But he had leaped out of the tower into an underground cave in its innermost part, and so was preserved. On the 3rd day afterward, those who were searching for him with loud lamentation, intending to give him a proper funeral, heard him speak from beneath the ground. When he came out, he filled all the Jews with unexpected joy, as though he had been preserved by God's providence to be their commander for the time to come. Vespasian now took his army with him from Antioch, the metropolis of Syria, which without dispute deserved the rank of the 3rd city in the Roman world, both for its size and for its other marks of prosperity. There he found King Agrippa waiting for his arrival with all his forces, and from there he marched to Ptolemais. At that city the inhabitants of Sepphoris and Galilee also came to meet him, because they favored peace with the Romans. These citizens had already taken thought for their own safety. Knowing the power of the Romans, they had gone to Cestius Gallus before Vespasian arrived, had pledged their faith to him, had received the security of his right hand, and had accepted a Roman garrison. At this time they also received Vespasian, the Roman general, very kindly, and readily promised that they would assist him against their own countrymen. At their request, the general gave them as many cavalry and infantry as he thought sufficient to oppose any incursions the Jews might make against them. The loss of Sepphoris would have been no small danger in the war that was now beginning, for it was the largest city of Galilee, was built in a place naturally very strong, and could serve as a security for the fidelity of the whole nation to the Romans. Phoenicia and Syria surround the 2 Galilees, which are called Upper Galilee and Lower Galilee. On the west they are bounded by the borders of the territory belonging to Ptolemais and by Carmel. That mountain had formerly belonged to the Galileans, but now belonged to the Tyrians. Adjoining Carmel is Gaba, which is called the City of Horsemen because the horsemen dismissed by Herod, the king, lived there. On the south, the Galilees are bounded by Samaria and Scythopolis as far as the river Jordan. On the east they are bounded by Hippy and Gadarus, and also by Ganlanitis and the borders of the kingdom of Agrippa. Their northern parts are bounded by Tyre and the country of the Tyrians. The Galilee called Lower Galilee extends in length from Tiberias to Zabulon, and among the maritime places Ptolemais is its neighbor. Its breadth runs from the village called Zaloth, which lies in the great plain, as far as Bersabé. From that same point the breadth of Upper Galilee begins and reaches as far as the village Baca, which divides it from the land of the Tyrians. Its length also runs from Eloth to Thela, a village near Jordan. These 2 Galilees, being so large and surrounded by so many foreign nations, have always been able to make strong resistance whenever war arose. The Galileans are accustomed to war from infancy and have always been very numerous. Their country has never lacked courageous men, nor has it ever lacked a large supply of them. The soil everywhere is rich and fruitful, and full of plantations of every kind of tree, so fertile that it invites even the laziest people to labor in cultivating it. Accordingly, the inhabitants cultivate all of it, and no part lies idle. The cities are also very close together, and the many villages throughout the country are everywhere so full of people because of the richness of the soil that even the smallest of them contain more than 15,000 inhabitants. In short, if anyone thinks Galilee is inferior to Perea in size, he will still have to prefer Galilee to it in strength. All of Galilee can be cultivated and is fruitful everywhere. Perea, though much larger in extent, is mostly desert and rough, and is much less suited to producing the gentler kinds of fruit. Yet in other parts it has moist soil and produces all kinds of fruits. Its plains are planted with trees of every sort, though the olive tree, the vine, and the palm tree are especially cultivated there. It is also sufficiently watered by torrents that flow out of the mountains, and by springs that never stop running, even when the torrents fail during the dog days. The length of Perea runs from Icarus to Pella, and its breadth from Philadelphia to Jordan. Its northern parts are bounded by Pella, as already said, and its western parts by Jordan. The land of Moab is its southern border, and its eastern limits reach to Arabia, Silbanitis, Philadelphine, and Gerasa. The country of Samaria lies between Judea and Galilee. It begins at a village in the great plain called Judea and ends at the Acrabian toparchy. Its nature is entirely the same as Judea's, for both countries consist of hills and valleys, are moist enough for agriculture, and are very fruitful. They have an abundance of trees and are full of autumn fruits, both those that grow wild and those produced by cultivation. They are not naturally watered by many rivers, but receive their chief moisture from rainwater, which they do not lack. The rivers they do have contain exceedingly sweet water. Because of the excellent grass there, their cattle yield more milk than cattle in other places. The greatest sign of their excellence and abundance is that each of these countries is very full of people. On the border of Samaria and Judea lies the village Anuath, also named Borsios. This is the northern boundary of Judea. If the southern parts of Judea are measured lengthwise, they are bounded by a village adjoining the borders of Arabia, which the Jews who live there call Jordan. Its breadth, however, extends from the river Jordan to Joppa. The city Jerusalem is situated exactly in the middle, and for that reason some have wisely called it the navel of the country. Nor is Judea without the pleasures that come from the sea, since its maritime places extend as far as Ptolemais. Judea was divided into 11 portions. The royal city Jerusalem was supreme among them, and presided over all the neighboring country, as the head presides over the body. The other cities which were below it presided over their own toparchies. Gophna was the second of these cities. Next came Acrebida, after them Thamna, Leda, Amos, Pella, Idumea, and Gedi, Herodium, and Jericho. After these came Jamnia and Joppa, which presided over the neighboring people. Besides these there were the regions of Gamala, Golanitis, Battania, and Trachonitis, which are also parts of the kingdom of Agrippa. This last country begins at Mount Libanus and the fountains of Jordan, and stretches in breadth to the lake of Tiberias. In length, it extends from a village called Arpha as far as Julias. Its inhabitants are a mixture of Jews and Syrians. In this way, as briefly as possible, I have described the country of Judea and the lands that lie around it. The auxiliaries sent to assist the people of Sepphoris consisted of 1,000 horsemen and 6,000 footmen under Placidus the tribune. They pitched their camp in 2 bodies in the great plain. The foot soldiers were placed inside the city to guard it, while the cavalry lodged outside in the camp. These horsemen, by continually marching in one direction or another and overrunning the nearby parts of the country, became very troublesome to Josephus and his men. They plundered all the places outside the city's jurisdiction and intercepted anyone who dared to go abroad. Because of this, Josephus marched against the city. He hoped to capture the place that he had recently surrounded with so strong a wall before its people revolted from the rest of the Galileans, a wall that he thought the Romans would have great difficulty taking. But in this he proved too weak and failed in both of his hopes. He could not force the place, and he could not persuade the people of Sepphoris to surrender it to him. By this attempt he provoked the Romans to treat the country according to the law of war. In their anger over the attempt, the Romans did not stop, by night or by day, burning the places in the plain, stealing the cattle in the country, constantly killing everyone who appeared capable of fighting, and leading the weaker people away as slaves into captivity. Thus all Galilee was filled with fire and blood, and it was spared no kind of misery or calamity. The only refuge the people had was that, when pursued, they could retreat into the cities whose walls Josephus had built. As for Titus, he sailed from Achaia to Alexandria sooner than the winter season usually allowed. He took with him the forces for which he had been sent, and marching with great speed, came suddenly to Ptolemais. There he found his father with the 2 legions, the 5th and the 10th, which were the most distinguished legions of all. Titus joined these to the 15th legion, which was with his father. 18 cohorts followed these legions. 5 cohorts also came from Caesarea with 1 troop of horsemen, and 5 other troops of horsemen came from Syria. Of these 10 cohorts, each had 1,000 foot soldiers, while the other 13 cohorts had only 600 foot soldiers apiece, with 120 horsemen. A considerable number of auxiliaries were also gathered from the kings Antiochus, Agrippa, and Sohemus. Each of them contributed 1,000 footmen, who were archers, and 1,000 horsemen. Malchus, the king of Arabia, also sent 1,000 horsemen and 5,000 footmen, most of whom were archers. Thus the whole army, including the auxiliaries sent by the kings, both horsemen and footmen, amounted when united to 60,000 men, besides the servants. These servants followed in vast numbers, and because they had been trained in war along with the rest, they should not be counted separately from the fighting men. As they served their masters in times of peace, so they underwent the same dangers with them in times of war. In skill and in strength they were inferior to none. The only difference was that they were subject to their masters. At this point one cannot help admiring the foresight of the Romans in providing themselves with household servants, who could not only perform the ordinary duties of daily life at other times, but could also be useful to them in war. Indeed, if anyone considers the other parts of their military discipline, he will be forced to admit that their gaining so vast a dominion has been the result of their courage, not merely a gift of fortune. They do not begin using their weapons for the first time when war comes, nor do they first put their hands into action then, after avoiding such labor in times of peace. Instead, as if their weapons were always attached to them, they never have any rest from military exercises. They do not wait for times of war to warn them to use their arms. Their military exercises differ in no way from the real use of their weapons, and every soldier is trained every day with great diligence, as though it were wartime. For this reason they bear the fatigue of battles so easily. No disorder can move them away from their usual discipline. No fear can frighten them out of it. No labor can wear them down. This steadiness of conduct makes them always overcome those who do not have the same firmness. Nor would a person be wrong to call their exercises battles without blood, and their battles exercises with blood. Their enemies also cannot easily surprise them by sudden attacks. As soon as the Romans have marched into an enemy's land, they do not begin fighting until they have walled their camp around. The fence they raise is not made rashly or unevenly. They do not all remain in it without order, nor do those inside take their places at random. If the ground is uneven, it is first leveled. Their camp is also measured as a square, and many carpenters stand ready with their tools to construct the buildings for them. The space within the camp is set apart for tents, while the outer circumference resembles a wall and is adorned with towers at equal distances. Between the towers stand engines for shooting arrows and darts, for slinging stones, and all other engines that can injure the enemy, each ready for its particular use. They also set up 4 gates, one on each side of the circumference. These gates are large enough for the entrance of the beasts and wide enough for making sallies, if the occasion requires it. They divide the inside of the camp into streets in a very convenient way, and place the tents of the commanders in the middle. At the very center of all is the general's own tent, in the nature of a temple. The whole camp therefore appears like a city suddenly built, with its marketplace, places for handicraft trades, and seats for officers both higher and lower, where, if disputes arise, their cases are heard and decided. The camp and everything in it are surrounded by a wall, and this is done sooner than one would imagine, because of the number and skill of the laborers. If the occasion requires it, a trench is drawn around the whole camp, 4 cubits deep and just as broad. Once they have secured themselves in this way, they live together by companies with quietness and decency, as all their other affairs are also managed with good order and safety. Each company has its wood, grain, and water brought to it whenever needed. They do not dine or sup separately whenever they please, but all together. The times for sleeping, watching, and rising are announced beforehand by the sound of trumpets, and nothing is done without such a signal. In the morning every soldier goes to his centurion to salute him, and the centurions go to their tribunes. Along with them, all the higher officers go to the general of the whole army. The general then gives them, as usual, the watchword and the other orders, which they carry to all those under their command. The same order is observed when they go to fight. By this discipline, they can turn themselves suddenly whenever there is occasion for making sallies, and can also come back in masses when they are recalled. When they are to leave their camp, the trumpet sounds. At that signal no one remains idle. At the first notice they take down their tents, and everything is made ready for departure. Then the trumpets sound again, ordering them to prepare for the march. They quickly load their baggage onto their mules and other beasts of burden, and stand at the starting point ready to march. They also set fire to their camp, both because it is easy for them to build another and so that it may never be useful to their enemies. Then the trumpets sound a 3rd time, signaling that they are to go out. This is done to stir up anyone who may for any reason be a little slow, so that no one will be out of rank when the army marches. Then the crier stands at the general's right hand and asks them 3 times, in their own language, whether they are now ready to go out to war. Each time they answer with a loud and cheerful voice, "We are ready." They say this almost before the question is asked, as if filled with a kind of warlike fury, and while they shout, they also lift up their right hands. After this, when they have gone out from their camp, they all march without noise and in an orderly manner. Each man keeps his own rank, as though they were going into battle. The foot soldiers are armed with breastplates and helmets, and have swords on both sides. The sword on the left side is much longer than the other, for the one on the right is no longer than a span. The foot soldiers chosen from the rest to attend the general himself carry a lance and a buckler, while the rest of the foot soldiers carry a spear and a long buckler. Besides these, they carry a saw, a basket, a pickaxe, an axe, a leather strap, a hook, and provisions for 3 days, so that a foot soldier has little need of a mule to carry his burdens. The horsemen have a long sword on their right sides and a long pole in their hands. A shield also lies obliquely along one side of their horses, and in their quiver they carry 3 or more darts with broad points, not smaller than spears. They also have helmets and breastplates, just like the foot soldiers. As for those chosen to attend the general, their armor does not differ at all from that of the horsemen belonging to the other troops. The legion that leads the march is always the one to which the lot assigns the duty. This is the manner in which the Romans march and rest, and these are the several kinds of weapons they use. When they are going to fight, they leave nothing without forethought and do nothing offhand. Counsel is always taken before any work begins, and what has been resolved is put into action immediately. For this reason they seldom make mistakes, and if they have been mistaken at any time, they easily correct those errors. They even consider mistakes made after prior consultation better than rash success that comes only from fortune, because such accidental advantage tempts men to act without consideration. Consultation, even when it sometimes fails to succeed, has this good in it: it makes men more careful afterward. Advantages that come by chance are not really owed to the man who gains them, and when unexpected misfortunes happen, there remains this comfort, that they had at least taken the best counsel they could to prevent them. They conduct their preparatory weapons exercises so that not only the bodies of the soldiers, but also their souls, may become stronger. They are also hardened for war by fear, for their laws impose capital punishments not only on soldiers who run away from the ranks, but also on those guilty of laziness and inactivity, even in a lesser degree. Their generals are even more severe than their laws. Yet they prevent any charge of cruelty toward those condemned by giving great rewards to brave soldiers. Their readiness to obey their commanders is so great that it is highly admirable in peace, and when they come into battle the whole army is like one body. Their ranks are so well joined together, their turnings so sudden, their hearing so sharp for orders, their sight so quick toward the ensigns, and their hands so nimble when they set to work, that whatever they do is done quickly, and whatever they suffer they bear with the greatest patience. We cannot find examples of their being conquered in battle when they came to close fighting, whether by the number of their enemies, by stratagems, by difficulties in the places where they fought, or even by fortune. Their victories have been more certain for them than fortune could have made them. Therefore, where counsel always goes before action, and where, after the best advice is taken, that advice is followed by so active an army, what wonder is it that the Euphrates on the east, the ocean on the west, the most fertile regions of Libya on the south, and the Danube and the Rhine on the north are the limits of this empire? One might well say that the Roman possessions are not inferior to the Romans themselves. I have given this account to the reader not so much in order to praise the Romans, but to comfort those who have been conquered by them, and to deter others from attempting rebellions under their government. This discussion of Roman military conduct may also be useful to curious readers who do not know these matters and yet wish to understand them. I now return from this digression. Vespasian and his son Titus had now stayed for some time at Ptolemais and had put the army in proper order. Meanwhile Placidus had overrun Galilee and had killed many of those he caught, though these were only the weaker part of the Galileans and people of fearful spirit. When he saw that the fighters always ran to the cities whose walls had been built by Josephus, he marched furiously against Jotapata, the strongest of them all. He supposed that he could easily take it by a sudden surprise, and that by doing so he would gain great honor for himself among the commanders and bring them a great advantage in the campaign to come. If the strongest place of all were once taken, he thought, the rest would be so terrified that they would surrender themselves. But he was greatly mistaken in this attempt. The men of Jotapata had been warned that he was coming to attack them, and they came out of the city and waited for him there. They attacked the Romans briskly when the Romans least expected it. They were numerous, ready for battle, and very eager, because they believed their country, their wives, and their children were in danger. They easily put the Romans to flight, wounded many of them, and killed 7. The Roman retreat, however, was not disorderly. The blows struck only the surface of bodies covered everywhere with armor, and the Jews threw their weapons from a great distance rather than daring to come hand to hand with them, since the Jews had only light armor while the Romans were fully armed. Still 3 men on the Jewish side were killed, and a few were wounded. Placidus, finding himself unable to assault the city, ran away. Vespasian, however, had a strong desire to fall upon Galilee. He marched out of Ptolemais after arranging his army in the order in which the Romans usually marched. He ordered the lightly armed auxiliaries and the archers to go first, so that they might prevent any sudden attacks by the enemy and search the woods that looked suspicious and capable of hiding ambushes. After them came that part of the Romans which was fully armed, both foot soldiers and horsemen. Next followed 10 men out of every 100, carrying their arms and the equipment necessary for measuring out a camp. After them came those whose job was to make the road level and straight. If it was rough anywhere or hard to pass over, they were to smooth it, and they were also to cut down woods that hindered the march, so that the army would not be distressed or exhausted as it advanced. Behind these Vespasian placed the army wagons that belonged both to himself and to the other commanders, with a considerable number of horsemen to guard them. After these he marched himself, accompanied by a select body of foot soldiers, horsemen, and pikemen. After him came the special cavalry of his own legion, for every legion had 120 horsemen who belonged particularly to it. Next came the mules carrying the engines for sieges and the other war machines of that kind. After these came the commanders of the cohorts and the tribunes, with soldiers chosen from the rest around them. Then came the ensigns surrounding the eagle, which stands at the head of every Roman legion. The eagle, king and strongest of all birds, seems to the Romans a sign of dominion, and an omen that they will conquer all those against whom they march. These sacred ensigns were followed by the trumpeters. Then came the main army, arranged in its squadrons and battalions, 6 men deep. Last after them followed a centurion who, according to custom, watched the rest. The servants of each legion all followed the foot soldiers, and led the soldiers' baggage, which was carried by mules and other beasts of burden. Behind all the legions came the whole multitude of the mercenaries. Those who brought up the rear came last of all for the security of the whole army. They included both foot soldiers and fully armored men, together with a great number of horsemen. In this order Vespasian marched with his army and came to the borders of Galilee. There he pitched his camp and restrained his soldiers, who were eager for war. He also displayed his army to the enemy in order to frighten them and to give them time to repent, to see whether they would change their minds before the matter came to battle. At the same time, he prepared the things needed for besieging their strongholds. The sight of the general did indeed bring many to repent of their revolt, and it threw them all into consternation. Those who were in Josephus's camp at the city called Garus, not far from Sepphoris, heard that the war had come near them, and that the Romans would suddenly fight them hand to hand. They scattered and fled, not only before they came to battle, but before the enemy ever came into sight. Josephus and a few others were left behind. When he saw that he did not have an army sufficient to engage the enemy, that the spirits of the Jews had sunk, and that most of them would gladly come to terms if they could be trusted, he already despaired of the success of the whole war. He decided to get as far out of danger as he possibly could, so he took those who remained with him and fled to Tiberias.
And there we will pause, with the Roman host pouring into Galilee and the rebel towns falling or fleeing before it. Next time, in part 15, Vespasian comes at last to Jotapata, the strongest place in Galilee, where Josephus himself commands, and the great siege begins, 4 to 7 days of ingenious devices, sallies, and slaughter. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.